I'm Errol Lewis. I'm joined in tonight's debate by Staten Island Advance political reporter Rachel Shapiro, New York 1 political reporter Courtney Gross, and Staten Island Advance senior opinion writer Tom Robleski. We'd like to thank the College of Staten Island for our use of Williamson Theater here at the Center for the Arts. For all of you watching at home, you can weigh in on tonight's debate on Twitter by using the hashtag NY11. And as a reminder, this debate is also being streamed live on the New York 1 website with no subscription login required. Now, the next 60 minutes will be an uninterrupted conversation about the issues where you'll get a chance to learn more about the two leading candidates who are seeking to replace Michael Grimm, who resigned earlier this year. So without further ado, let's introduce the two candidates whose speaking order was picked at random earlier today. Staten Island District Attorney Dan Donovan and Brooklyn City Councilman Vincent Gentile. Here's the format of the debate, folks. Each candidate will make a 60-second opening and closing statement. Candidates will also have 60 seconds to answer individual questions. Rebuttals to those questions can be 45 seconds long. And 30-second re-rebuttals will be allowed at the discretion of the panelists. There's also going to be a segment in our debate where each candidate will be allowed to directly ask a question of his opponent, and candidates will also be asked a series of questions in what we call a lightning round, when only short one-word answers like yes or no will be accepted. Visual aids, prepared notes, and charts are not allowed. So with all of that, we are ready to begin with opening statements. The first is by Dan Donovan.
Well, thank you very much, Errol. Thank you for Staten Island Advance, New York 1 and Time 1 for hosting us. Thank you, CSI, for hosting us. And thank you all for coming tonight to participate in our democratic process. I have served this community for nearly 20 years. First as Chief of Staff to the Borough President at the time we closed the Fresh Kills landfill. I then served as the Deputy Borough President, and after that I've been your District Attorney for the last 12 years, helping to make Staten Island the safest big city, the safest borough, and the safest big city in America. So people have asked me, why do you want to run for Congress? As District Attorney, I run every 4 years. As Congressman, I'd have to run every 2 years. I get to come home every night as District Attorney. As a Congressman, I have to be away from home 3 nights a week. As a District Attorney, I get paid more than a Congressman. But let me tell you why. I have an 88-year-old mother who suffers from dementia. And our government shook her hand 70 years ago when she joined the workforce and said, if you pay into Social Security, if you pay into Medicare, when you need those benefits, they'll be there. And I want to go to Washington and make sure they're there for my mother and for your family. In addition, as many of you know, I'm about to have my first child. And my mother and father made my life better than theirs. I want to make sure for the next generation we could say the same thing about my baby and your family. So I want to go to Washington to do that for your family as I want to do for my family. I thank you very, very much, and I hope after tonight's debate you choose to vote for me on May 5th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. Thank you, everyone, for putting this together.
There's only one person on this stage tonight that has legislative experience. I have 18 years legislative experience. I can hit the ground running day one and knowing how to be a legislator. I don't have to watch a video on how to be a legislator. So I'm not an amateur in terms of being a legislator. I'm the only one on this stage that has represented both sides of this district, both in Brooklyn and in Staten Island very well. Only one on this stage that has been in the majority and in the minority and know how to operate in both. You're going to hear a lot of talk tonight about contrasting views about our city and our country, but you're going to hear plans and visions from me. I have a plan to help the middle class. I have a plan to protect seniors from the cuts that the Republicans are proposing in their budget. I have a plan to bring back federal money to this district to work on our infrastructure and rebuild our roads. Those are specific things that I have plans for and you'll hear about. as opposed to what you might hear from the other side of vague generalities and certain partisan pronouncements. You know, you also hear from me, you also hear tonight that as an 18-year legislator, I know you can't just point at something and say, there's a problem. You have to have a plan, and I have a plan. So I look forward tonight to talking to you about the plans that will help the people of the 11th Congressional District. Thank you.
Dan Donovan. Mr. Donovan, we've seen other jurisdictions handle controversial police shootings and police fatalities in different ways. In Ferguson, Missouri, a full transcript of the grand jury's proceedings were released. In North Charleston, South Carolina, and in Tulsa, Oklahoma, swift investigation led to immediate arrests of police officers believed to have acted improperly or illegally. While you have said that New York law prevents you from revealing grand jury information, as a member of Congress, you'll be joining a vigorous national debate about the benefits of acting with speed and transparency. So, based on what you've learned from the Eric Garner case, are there any laws or procedures in New York that you think need to be changed?
Well, thank you very much for the question, Errol. This is a national issue that we're facing now, as you pointed out. And New York does have prohibitions about revealing secrecy in grand juries. Ferguson, Missouri, they have sunshine laws. Everything was revealed there. There's a specific reason why we have the secrecy of grand juries. It's to protect the innocent who are investigated when no charges are brought against them. It's to protect witnesses who only come forward because no one will know that they appeared in a grand jury and no one will know what they've seen, what they've said in a grand jury. So there's real public policy reasons for this. We have a very difficult time now getting witnesses to testify in any cases. This stop snitching atmosphere that we have in our communities now have really have us struggling to perform our duties as people in the criminal justice system. I think the public policy purposes for the secrecy of our grand jury are something that ought to remain. Otherwise, we're not going to have anybody testifying in a grand jury.
Based on what you've learned from the Garner case, is there anything you would have done differently if you could do it again?
No, we actually presented a fair and impartial presentation over 9 weeks to 23 citizens. Our government, our forefathers, knew enough that government was too powerful to accuse their citizens. They decided that a grand jury proceeding with 23 citizens ought to determine criminal liability against one of their own citizens. Those people heard from 50 witnesses, saw 60 pieces of evidence, saw 4 videotapes, and they made their conclusion. As I've said to everybody, you may not want to agree with their decision, but you have to respect it.
And so I guess finally, do you think they made a mistake in jurisdictions like Missouri where they do have sunshine laws?
I don't know the difficulties they find in Missouri by having sunshine laws of getting people to testify. I know even with our grand jury secrecies, we have great difficulty having people to come forward to testify. And without witnesses, Errol, we don't have a criminal justice system.
Mr. Gentile, are there laws or procedures in New York that you think need to be changed? And do you think the Eric Garner case should have been handled differently in any respect?
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting that that he talks about the secrecy of the grand jury, and that is New York law. But it was only recently, in 2012, that DA Donovan and his office actually consented to the release of grand jury minutes in a different case. And there were witnesses there in that case also, and they consented to the release of those minutes. The judge denied the release of the minutes, but the DA consented to it. So if he wasn't concerned about the witnesses in that case in 2012, then one has to argue, what concern did he have for these witnesses in this case, or was it more a concern that to keep the grand jury minutes secret because of trying to avoid some criticism of himself and his office? That's the concern I have, because you know, even though a grand jury is normally secret, secrecy breeds suspicion. And in this case, we don't have to worry about revealing the identity of the defendant. Everybody knows it was the police officer. So even if we were to release the police officers, have the court and have the DA join us, as he did in 2012, and consent to the release of the police officer's testimony, at least the public in general, the citizens in Staten Island and throughout the city will at least get to see what questions he was asked, what answers he gave, and what questions the grand jurors asked him. That could help dispel some of the suspicions. So I don't understand why, if he did it in 2012 on another case, he can't consider.
Give him a chance to
I
respond.
don't know what case he's talking about, Errol.
People v. Bonelli.
We have 12,000 cases a year at the DA now for individual abuse. That's 150,000 cases. I don't know the case he was talking about.
And in that case,
We're going to move on now, but thank you both. It is Rachel Shapiro's turn to ask a question.
Mr. Gentile, we're going to start with you. While the city's Build It Back program has made significant progress in this year, getting people back into their homes after Hurricane Sandy, many Staten Islanders are still waiting to get back into their homes. What is broken about this system and what can be done?
What is broken about this system is the fact that we, in many cases, just gave the responsibility to contractors and subcontractors without any oversight, particularly from the federal level with FEMA and certainly at the local level too in many cases. So what we have found out since Superstorm Sandy is that some of these contractors and subcontractors were committing fraud, insurance fraud. And so we need to be more vigilant in terms of holding FEMA accountable for the oversight that they're supposed to be doing. But we also need to speed up the program, the Build It Back program. The mayor is on that track to do that. But certainly, I think that those who committed the fraud should not get away without some repercussions. And to date, I do not know of any prosecution that's been done by the chief law enforcement officer in Staten Island on any of the Sandy insurance contractors or subcontractors.
With regard to your point about the subcontractors, Build It Back has already taken steps to change that, the way the subcontractors are handling oversight. The city has a bit more oversight of the subcontractors. Now, you mentioned speeding up the process. What specifically should be sped up?
Well, I think the mayor said it, that he's committed to a certain number of new constructions by certain different dates. And those dates are far sooner than what would have been if we kept the same pace under the Bluebird.
I think two things have to be done immediately, and I've suggested two of them, Rachel. One is the FEMA reform. It was a disaster what happened to people by Superstorm Sandy, and it was a disaster what happened to them when the government came to help them. There were multiple inspections by multiple engineers, multiple agencies involved, none of which spoke with one another. And as you saw from that 60 Minutes episode, there was so much fraud that came about through that there's 2,000 lawsuits now claiming that engineering reports were falsified. What I have proposed is that we streamline the FEMA process. There'd be one inspector going to a home. They videotape the damage. We have residents who sign an affidavit saying that damage was not pre-existing. We put it on the internet for everyone to see, and we get those people their money quicker and get them back in their homes. It's been 2.5 years since these people have been displaced. It's a crying shame what their government's done to them. The other thing that we have to deal with now is the flood insurance. It's going to be astronomical once they draw the new maps. And what I have proposed is just like with your car insurance. When you have anti-lock brakes, when you have airbags, when you have anti-theft devices, you get a discount on your insurance. No such discount is being offered to people who have to buy flood insurance in the new flood zones. But we're building a new seawall. There's a jetty, there's oyster beds, there's precautions being taken, and individual homeowners will take even further precautions. They should be given a discount, as they are with their car insurance and their house insurance, for their flood insurance, for those precautions they're taking to make sure that the damage that they incurred this time around doesn't happen during the next storm.
That's all well and good, but even with the 60 Minutes report, there still has been no prosecutions of fraudulent insurance inspectors in the county of Staten Island.
My colleague claims to have been a prosecutor. Those are actually federal crimes, Rachel, and they're prosecuted in
You
federal
can't come up with something on the state level? Come on, Dan, come on.
I'd like to ask a follow-up to both of you. How do you feel the de Blasio administration has handled the Build-A-Back? How do you feel the de Blasio administration has handled the Build-A-Back program as opposed to his predecessor, the Bloomberg administration? Do you think there has been significant progress? Do you credit the de Blasio administration with getting that movement to get people back in their homes?
I don't think we were prepared for this. I don't think either administration was. And you'd have to ask those people who 2.5 years later still aren't back in their homes if they're satisfied with the progress of Build-A-Back.
I'm sorry, just repeat.
How do you feel the de Blasio administration has made, how do you feel about the progress the de Blasio administration has made as compared to the Bloomberg administration?
Yes, I think the de Blasio administration is making good progress. Frankly, he was dumped in his lap when he became, it was already in progress when he became, and it was a mess when he became mayor. And he's worked hard over the last year and a half to put it back together with new leadership and new oversight and new timetables that will work. Is it too long? Yes, it is too long, but when the mayor got into office, it was already a year, or more than a year, after the storm.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move now to Courtney Gross.
As we're all aware, this was a very big week in presidential politics. We saw our former Senator, Secretary Clinton, announce on Sunday. Then we saw just yesterday Senator Marco Rubio from Florida announce his candidacy. So I'm going to turn to Mr. Donovan. And in what is expected to be a very crowded GOP field, have you picked a favorite yet?
I have not. I'm waiting to see who emerges. Right now, 3 people have declared their intentions to run for the nomination. There are other people who have put out feelers and people who have showed expressions of interest. I've only met 2 individuals. I only know 2 of the individuals who showed an expression, Governor Chris Christie and Governor George Pataki. So I'm waiting to see who emerges before I pick a candidate.
And what issues do you think, or do you want to hear from that particular presidential candidate?
I want to hear from them how they're going to protect our middle class, how they're going to protect our nation, how they're going to change the foreign policies of Barack Obama, who have us now dealing with Cuba and not dealing with Israel. Those are the things I want to hear.
Republican nominee would be?
I suspect I will support the Republican nominee, yes, definitely.
And I want to turn to Mr. Gentile. You, unlike some other Democrats, specifically the mayor, came out very early, almost immediately, to support Secretary Clinton. So why do you think that she would make a good president?
Well, first of all, if you look at the state of the federal government in the sense of Congress, it's such an anti-New York sentiment in Congress these days that Secretary Clinton, having been a United States Senator from New York, I think would be our biggest advocate in Washington, and to have her in the White House being advocate for New York City particularly is a sea change in what we see right now in Washington, particularly from the Congress. So if for no other reason, I think she would be on our side. She would understand the problems in New York. She would understand what it means to protect and grow the middle class. She would understand what it means to raise the minimum wage to $13 an hour. She would understand what it means to protect seniors from cuts to Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. She understands those things, and that's what we need as a chief executive, someone in the White House who understands what it's like to have to live in a high-cost place like New York City.
Do you think that her candidacy would benefit from a challenge on the left to perhaps make way for the general election?
Would it benefit? I don't think she'd want to challenge it. You know, I think she has been, she's super qualified to be president, and I think most Democrats understand that, so I don't foresee any serious challenge.
Did you support her or Barack Obama in the 2008 primary?
I'm sorry,
In the primary in 2008, who did you support?
Barack Obama.
Thank you.
Mr. Gentile, this is something that you alluded to in your opening statement. Curious, what exactly will you do if you get to Washington to address it, to bring money back, to address Staten Island's critical infrastructure and transit needs, particularly the money that we need to repair the borough's crumbling roads?
Yes, actually, I would co-sponsor a bill that now has been introduced by Congressman Delaney in Baltimore and Congressman Hanna in upstate New York. And it's a bipartisan bill, so there's still some hope in Congress. There's a bipartisan bill, and it's called the Infrastructure 2.0 Act. And what it would do is it would reauthorize and refund the Highway Trust Fund. Right now, the Highway Trust Fund is scheduled to run out of money at the end of May. And if it runs out of money, all the maintenance and road work that we enjoy from the federal government would stop. What this would do is boost the revenue in the Highway Trust Fund by imposing a 8.75% tax on the overseas profits of multinational corporations that are not being taxed right now. That 8.75% tax, one-time tax, on those multinational corporations for their overseas profits would produce $120 billion for the Highway Trust Fund. Wouldn't cost the American taxpayer anything. The $120 billion for the trust fund, that money is road repair and road restructuring. Also, we would produce another $50 billion for a new infrastructure fund for new projects. And I intend to be part of that group that brings some of that new infrastructure fund money back to our neighborhood to build subway elevators in Brooklyn, to build the light rail, to at least contribute federal money to the light rail projects on Staten Island, West Shore, over the Bayonne Bridge, the bus rapid transit projects, projects like that, to finish what Congressman McMahon started in rehabilitating the Staten Island Expressway. Those are the types of things that need federal money, and over the last 4 years, we've had no federal money come back to this district. We're taxpayers like everyone else. Why can't we get the federal money? We need a congressman.
That kind of legislation has in the GOP House, GOP-controlled House, and what do you think the likelihood that legislation, tax increase legislation like that, will actually get through the House?
It's for me.
This is follow-up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's a bipartisan bill, so that's a good step forward, right? It's a bipartisan bill, and the fact is that from what I've read, the number of co-sponsors is growing every week. So that's a good sign because they understand, everybody understands how important the Highway Trust Fund is and how important infrastructure is. Not only rebuilding infrastructure, but by rebuilding infrastructure, you're also creating jobs. And creating jobs is what helps build the middle class. So this is very important on many, many levels. And I think whether you're a Republican or Democrat, you understand the importance of it.
That's right.
My determined answer to everything is taxes. He has voted to raise sales tax, income tax, and now he wants to tax corporations who are already investing their money overseas. There's another way to do this. Encourage them to invest their money in America. They're American corporations. Do that by not taxing their money that they invest in the United States. Because they're investing in foreign countries because they're not being taxed by it. There's an American infrastructure fund being proposed right now, where those corporations can take those overseas gains and invest them in America and not pay taxes on them. And every state would be able to borrow from that fund at a low interest to pay for their local infrastructure improvements or new projects. So there's a way to do this without taxing. Taxing discourages productivity, it discourages innovation, it discourages people from wanting to invest in this country. We are right now a country with $18 trillion worth of debt. My opponent is supporting a Democratic House budget bill that adds $6 trillion onto that debt and increases our taxes by $1.8 trillion. Taxing discourages people from investing in our country. Giving them an incentive to invest in their own country is the way to go, and the American Infrastructure Fund does that.
Giving them an incentive to invest in our country is exactly what this bill does. Because, and Republicans who signed on understand this, that once it's a one-time tax, and once the tax is paid, they will be free to bring the money back to America and invest in America. If they brought it back without this bill, they would be taxed 3 times as much. And that's why the money right now stays overseas, because it's not taxed there. You give them a break and say, we're going to give you this opportunity for one-time tax, 8.75%, probably a third of what they would otherwise pay if they brought the money back. That is the incentive, once it's paid, to bring the money back to America and invest here in this country. That's what we have to do.
We talk a lot about Staten Island infrastructure needs, and a lot of folks in the audience here are familiar with it, but what are some of the, like a Brooklyn infrastructure need, or something that you see that really needs on the other side of the district?
They have the same needs as we do, except the difference is the residents of Brooklyn, who I want to represent, have subways, and those need repair. Our subway system's over 100 years old, and those residents over there depend on it. They need other transportation options as well, as Staten Islanders do. We don't have as many options for people. We have an incredible harbor that is so underutilized, but we can transport people to work at the school by using the harbor through ferry services. So the people over in Brooklyn need the same things as the people of Staten Island do. They need better options for transportation, they need better infrastructure, and they need much better transportation than they have now.
Federal money for ferry services is something that I've worked with after Sandy, and got federal money to have a temporary ferry service from Brooklyn to Manhattan. And now I've worked with the mayor. I'm the ferry guy in Brooklyn because I worked with the mayor to make sure that his new ferry plan included several new ferry lines that would affect the 11th Congressional District on the Brooklyn side. We still have to work with the mayor to try to get a new ferry line from the South Shore of Staten Island to Manhattan. And that would be a big, big plus for Staten Island.
Okay. Thank you all. So you know what this is about. What we call the cross-examination is where each candidate asks his opponent a question, and you'll have 60 seconds to respond. We'll start with you, Mr. Donovan.
Thank you, Earl. Mr. Gentile, you claim to have been a legislator for 12 years in the City Council. But let me tell you what 5 different news media outlets have said about your record. Mr. Gentile has little clout in the City Council. He has a lackluster presence in the City Council. He is not especially powerful in the City Council. He is the lone voice of the failed status quo.
What question?
And one media outlet said that you were next to last in bringing resources back to your district. And that was while you were in this majority of the City Council. How could the people of this district trust that as the most junior member in the minority session of Congress, that you'd be able to bring back anything back home?
Well, first of all, I'm very proud to say I've brought over $60 million back to my city. And you know, Dan, you see, you don't understand sometimes a legislator has to take a stand. And sometimes the legislator has to say no when the mayor comes to you and in this case Bloomberg, and wanted to raise a tax, and the speaker wanted to raise the tax back in 2007. And I said no, I'm not voting for it. And they twisted my arm and I still said no. And they twisted it even more and I still said no. And I voted against a tax increase in 2007, and I've done that against congestion pricing when both the speaker and the mayor wanted congestion pricing. So sometimes you have to take a stand, and as a result, sometimes you don't get, you're not at the top of the list in terms of the speaker and the mayor. But that's okay, because I stood strong and I advocated for my constituents, and I still brought home 6. So Dan, you have said on several occasions that you're against raising the minimum wage. You even said that the minimum wage is mostly for teenagers, when in fact studies have shown that those who are on the minimum wage, 75% of them are adults, and 50% of those are women. So it is not just a college thing. So my question to you is, you're opposed to raising the minimum wage. Could you tell us what the federal minimum wage is?
Well, to correct the record, Errol, I have never said that I'm against raising the minimum wage. What I said is that if you do that without helping small businesses pay that minimum wage, you're going to have people out of work because they will close. Today, Scott Stringer released a report, the comptroller, saying how the economy would grow if minimum wage was raised to $15 an hour in New York, and how much more money people would have. Absent from that report, and Comptroller Stringer said so, was how would this affect small businesses? A number of things are going to happen if you raise minimum wage without helping businesses provide that minimum wage for their employees. They're going to hire less people, they're going to fire people they already have, or they're going to close down and you're going to have more people unemployed. So I am not opposed to raising the minimum wage. What I want to do is help small businesses provide wage increases for their employees, and you can do that by giving incentives, tax relief for them, and stop over-regulating where small businesses spend more of their time making sure they're complying with things like Obamacare than they are selling their products.
The question is, what is the federal?
As high as it can be, as long as it can be sustained by, small businesses.
We cannot control the answer, you can only ask the question.
He doesn't know. He doesn't know.
He doesn't know. Let's go to the lightning round. I'm going to ask each candidate a series of questions. Each candidate will generally only be able to answer yes or no to each question. We'll start with you, Mr. Gentile. Mr. Gentile, who's the first person you ever voted for?
John Anderson.
Mr. Donovan.
I believe it's Ronald Reagan.
Mr. Donovan, where was your last vacation?
In Florida.
Mr. Gentile.
Orlando, Florida.
We weren't together.
Mr. Gentile, should all police officers be equipped with body cameras?
Absolutely.
Mr. Donovan.
Yes, as long as we find a way to do it properly.
And we should have federal money to assist these localities in
Understood. Mr. Donovan, who would you like to name a Staten Island ferry actor? You worked hard?
You did work hard on this question. I would say Mike Bloomberg.
Mr. Gentile. Really?
A former Democratic chairman in Staten Island, John Lavelle.
Yeah! Have you ever voted for someone who's not a member of your political party?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan.
I did. Ed Koch, who endorsed me 3 times at crossing party lines.
Mr. Donovan, have you attended a same-sex wedding?
I have never been invited to one.
Mr. Gentile.
I was invited to one but could not make it for other reasons.
Mr. Gentile, should parents make their children, or have their children, opt out of standardized tests?
If they so choose, yes.
Mr. Donovan.
It's a family choice, yes.
Mr. Donovan, do you do your own taxes?
I do not.
Mr. Gentile.
I do not.
Mr. Gentile, was Michael Grimm a good congressman?
Michael Grimm is not a good congressman.
Mr. Donovan.
Michael Grimm, Okay. You asked the question.
We're raising the differences for the voters to see. Mr. Donovan, where's the first place you would take a first-time visitor to Staten Island?
Probably to one of our parks. We're the borough of parks, as Brooklyn's the borough of churches. Probably one of our parks.
Mr. Gentile?
Staten Island? In Staten Island?
Yes.
I would take him to one of the nicest restaurants I know of, that I know on the North Shore, Coachella's.
Okay. Mr. Gentile, do you support codifying Roe versus Wade in New York state law? Mr. Gentile?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm
Do you
sorry.
support codifying Roe v. Wade in New York state law?
Yes, absolutely. Women's choice.
Mr. Donovan?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yes and no. Mr. Donovan, have you ever smoked marijuana?
I have.
Mr. Gentile?
Yes.
Mr. Gentile, have you ever missed voting in an election?
No.
Mr. Donovan?
No.
Mr. Donovan, when was the last time you rode the Staten Island Ferry?
Sometime last month. I don't know exactly when.
Mr. Gentile?
Last October.
Okay. Mr. Gentile, should the Boston Marathon bomber get the death penalty? Mr. Gentile?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Should the Boston Marathon bomber
Yes.
get the death
Yes.
penalty? Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
And Mr. Donovan, what's a must-see television show for you?
Rerun of Seinfeld.
Mr. Gentile?
There's a good show, actually, on TV every weeknight on NY1 called Inside the City.
And I mean, finally, Mr. Gentile, who was the last politician you donated money to?
I donated money to a former colleague of mine in the Queens District Attorney's Office, who is now running for the Nassau County District Attorney, Madeline Singas, who is now the acting District Attorney.
Mr. Donovan?
John McCain.
Okay. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. We're going to move back to some questions from my colleagues. Rachel.
We're starting with you, Mr. Donovan. With about 11 million undocumented immigrants in the country and more coming, what specifically does Congress need to do to secure the border and address those currently here?
Well, certainly the number one thing is to secure the borders so we don't have more people coming. You secure the borders with more patrols. There's places where we could fence the border, but we have to fund it. The funding for the border control is absolutely horrible. And for the people who are already here, there's different categories, Rachel, of people who are already here. There are people who have followed our procedures. There are people who we ask to fill out documents and go through this process and you'll become a citizen. That's taking too long. If there's any immigration reform, we have to shorten that process for people who have followed our laws. For the people who haven't followed our laws, people who are here illegally, we have to find a way to get them to become legal and follow a pathway to become a citizen. There should be some fines or penalties for breaking the law, but the only people that I'm in favor of deporting are people who commit heinous crimes in our government, in our cities. And we have done that in the past. We used to deport people before they did their sentences, and they come right back. Now we deport them after they've done their sentences. But those are the only people I feel we should be deporting.
Well, he must have changed his position because he said to an Observer newspaper reporter that we would have to consider deportation across the board. So if that's the case, then that means he wants to tear families apart, and that's the program that the president has tried to prevent with his executive order that would keep families who have come here illegally but have had children while in the United States, and those children are now citizens. The president's program would allow that group of people a deferral and a way to citizenship first of all the illegals. That still leaves 6 million people not affected by the president's executive order. But this is a good humanitarian step in the way of not tearing families apart. And these people who have families, who have children who are American citizens, certainly are contributing to our community. They're consumers, they're taxpayers in many cases, and they contribute greatly to our community. So we should do everything we can to try to support the president's program.
I'm not in favor of tearing families apart, as my opponent claims that I am. And the deportation I would like to see remain in place as people who commit heinous crimes in our society.
Would you both support anyone who would be given a path to citizenship paying back taxes, paying any other sorts of fines or penalties as part of that?
Absolutely, because the people who are doing this legally and follow our procedures have not broken the law. People who are here illegally have broken the law. I don't want to deport them. I want to find them a pathway, but they must pay a penalty or fine for breaking the law.
That's all. That's certainly all part of the president's executive action, the penalties and so forth. So that's all part of the president's action.
Okay, cool.
I want to turn now to foreign policy. A potential compromise was reached today on legislation that would give Congress the power to review any deal reached between the administration and Iran on its nuclear program. What kind of oversight, let's start with Mr. Donovan, what kind of oversight do you think Congress should have over the final deal? And what is your position on this framework thus far?
Well, the only reason the president agreed to this is because they had the votes to override his veto. He would have vetoed this bill, but they had the votes. It was a bipartisan bill. All of Congress wants oversight, and they should have a say and should be able to reject the lifting of any sanctions against a terrorist country like Iran. As soon as the president put this deal together, you know, Ronald Reagan used to speak about peace through strength. Our enemies are testing us right now, and our allies are questioning our loyalty to them. The rest of the world sees America as weak. Yesterday, Putin says he's going to sell air defense missiles to Iran as a direct result of the president's proposal to lift sanctions from Iran. And Iran has told us that they will not let us inspect their nuclear facilities, they will not diminish their stockpile, and they want sanctions lifted immediately. You ask Israel, you ask the Prime Minister of Israel if they're comfortable with that, you ask the Arab nations in that region if they're comfortable with that, and they'll all tell you that this is a pathway to Iran getting a nuclear weapon, and they are dead set against it.
So if you were given the vote on this framework and what we know about it, would you reject it?
I would reject the president's framework.
And Mr. Gentile, how would you vote?
I would, at this point, the framework is a good framework, and it's a framework toward a diplomatic solution with, as Ronald Reagan, his hero, has said in the past, that you trust but you verify. And this framework has that verification. You trust but you verify. And certainly part of this framework is a full verification of uranium sites, of all types of nuclear sites that might be in Iran. So this framework and all his concerns are within this framework. So I also agree with Senator Lindsey Graham, who's another Republican, who said, let's give this framework a chance. Let's wait until it's filled in until the end of June.
Do you agree with the actions taken today that essentially ensure that Congress will have oversight over the final deal?
Yes, I think Congress should have some oversight, and what is being worked out looks like a not only a bipartisan solution, but a solution that the president can support too. And that, again, is a good sign, because I think that Congress should have some role.
And then a follow-up for both of you. Do you think that as part of this deal, Iran needs to recognize Israel's right to exist?
Oh, absolutely. And my opponent seems to be the only one that thinks this is a good framework. Senator Schumer didn't think it was. Most of the members of the congressional delegation from New York City didn't think it was a good framework. Everyone's come out against it except for my opponent.
When you reduce the number of centrifuges from 19,000 to 5,000, and you force them to use the old style centrifuge that is harder to use, when you reduce the uranium enrichment to under 4%, and when you need 90% or better to make the nuclear fuel, that's important. And when you reduce the stockpiles from 100 1,000 to down to 300. That's a 97% reduction in stockpile. So that is the beginning of a good framework. And I say let it play itself out. And if there are issues that Iran will not agree on, then no deal is better than a bad deal. But we have to, as we did with Russia in 1990, 80s and 90s, we have to try at a time a diplomacy. Otherwise, Dan, the other option is that they're going to build their nuclear warheads, and we're going to go to war. You want to go to war?
They won't build. I don't want to go to war. They won't build it. The sanctions are strangling them. Why do you think they want them lifted? Put more sanctions on them, and they'll get rid of those facilities. They'll dismantle those facilities. No, they won't. Under this deal, Israel and the Arab nations said it will take Iran 1 year for the buildup for a nuclear weapon. 1 year, with what they want to keep in country.
Mr. Gentile, just to answer my previous question, do you think that Iran needs to recognize Israel's right to exist in order for this deal to move forward?
Yes, I think we have to do whatever is necessary to be sure that Israel is secure. They are a stable democracy in the Middle East, and yes, I think Iran has to in some way agree that Israel's right to exist remains.
There's a heroin crisis on Staten Island.
I'm sorry?
A heroin crisis on Staten Island. And local officials and law enforcement have launched programs to warn youth about the dangers of addiction. What is the federal government's role in combating the problem? And do you support more community-based programs?
I definitely support more community-based programs. Certainly, when I was a prosecutor, one of the options you always have is to send those who really need treatment to treatment in community-based programs, and I would often do that in lieu of incarceration in certain cases. But certainly, one of the things we can do as a federal government is to support programs with federal money that not only help the addict, but also save the addict's life with the Noxolone that is administered to someone who is overdosing on heroin, and it can save their lives because it reverses the reaction in the body. And that's something that now the police department is using, but it can be widely distributed and widely used through treatment centers, and I think that's something that the federal government should look at doing. Now, because of narcotics, there's been an increase in gun shootings, and this came from the DA's representative who came to the city council and spoke at a budget hearing. And there's an increase because of drugs, narcotics in Staten Island, of shootings and gang activity. And yet, even with that statement, they've only had 14 felony trials in 2013. So there's an increase in criminal activity, but not an increase in felony prosecution. So there's a problem there, and that's why we have to do a better job, and the DA has to do a better job in prosecuting the narcotics surge on Staten Island.
Tom, we won 12 of those 14 trials, by the way. We did a real good job. And as the Division of Criminal Justice Services has pointed out, my office for the last 11 out of the 12 years I've been in office has led the city in felony conviction rates. We get an incredibly number of top count pleas in our community. I'm very proud of the fact that this is the safest borough and the safest big city in America. New York City Police Department helped do that, and so did my office. What I've already proposed. My opponent talks about naloxone. I actually paid for and equipped every police officer on Staten Island with naloxone. We've had 22 saves right now to date of people who would be dead if it wasn't naloxone. Attacking the drug problem is threefold. You try to educate people before they become addicted. You try to treat people who are already addicted, and then you try to enforce the laws. One of the things we were very successful, Assembly Member Mike Cusick and State Senator Andy Lanza got the governor to pass the iStop bill, which requires doctors and pharmacists to go into a database to make sure someone's not doctor shopping or pharmacy shopping to get prescription drugs. I have proposed a federal I-Stop program because Staten Island alone has 3 crossings to New Jersey. If a pharmacy on Staten Island refuses to fill a prescription, somebody could just go over the Bayonne Bridge and get it filled in New Jersey because that pharmacist doesn't have to look into our database. In fact, they don't have access to our database. A federal I-Stop program will stop people from doctor shopping, stop people from pharmacy shopping, and stop this addiction to prescription pills that we've seen now as we're curtailing it. People turning to heroin. Now, heroin is not a legal substance like a prescription drug is. There's a medical purpose for a prescription drug. Heroin's not grown in the United States. So tackling the heroin problem is so different than tackling the prescription drug problem. And tackling heroin requires federal intervention because it has to be imported into our country. And so we have to spend more money enforcing our federal drug laws and stopping people from importing heroin into our country.
Anything your office could have done differently, do you think, looking back in retrospect, the pill epidemic that preceded the heroin epidemic, your opponent, so, your office didn't do anything that you said, maybe I could have done something differently on this?
I thought we did a remarkable job, actually. We have the best or the most successful drug treatment court in the state for people who are in treatment for a year, and the second most successful one for people who are in 2-year programs. We put more people in treatment than put people in jail because of their addictions. We got real smart, Tom, dealing with people with addictions. We saw that if we took them out of the criminal justice system and put them in treatment, we would save their lives, we'd save the taxpayers' money, and we'd never see them again if we treated their addictions. And we have a very successful drug treatment program on Staten Island in our courts.
And yet, if you ask the people at 701 Bard Avenue and the neighbors on Bard Avenue around 701 Bard, they will tell you that they were trying for 5 years to get a crack house shut down, and the DA's office was not able to do it. And ultimately, it was resolved in some way. They all left that house. But for 5 years on Bard Avenue, they tried to work with the DA's office and were unable to get it done.
We have really exactly 3 minutes until we go to closing statements. So I'd like to do something a little unusual. If you could tell us something, Dan Donovan, about yourself that might surprise voters, something that's a little bit outside the normal lines of this conversation tonight.
I think people would be surprised about my upbringing. I was raised by, I'm an only child, raised by a longshoreman and a woman who worked in the factory that made band uniforms and school uniforms. We lived in a 3-room apartment where our living room became my bedroom at night in the Tompkinsville section of Staten Island. I remember our rent being $75 a month. And then Catherine and Daniel Donovan's only son, only child, got into Monsignor Farrell, and they didn't know how they were going to pay the $35 a month of tuition. But they scrimped and they saved, and they sent their only son to school where my father never graduated high school, my mother only graduated high school because they wanted a better life for their child than they had for themselves. I think that's something that no one knows about me, and it's something I think explains a lot about why I take the positions that I do, and why I want to help people pay for their kids' tuitions, why I want people to spend their money rather than the government spend money, why I want us to lower their taxes, and I want to give people opportunities to work. Thank you.
Some people do know, but I am a twin. I am a twin, but it's my twin sister. So, and she's here tonight somewhere, right? I'm 2 minutes older than my twin sister. I don't let her forget it. And certainly, it's been an interesting time because now she is a recent resident of Staten Island, and certainly now I spend many Sundays, just Easter Sunday at her house here. So that's probably something that some people know, but not everybody knows. There's a twin.
Thanks very much. Okay, it is time for our 60-second closing statements. You go first, Mr. Donovan.
Thank you very much. Thank you for hosting this event. Thank you for everybody participating tonight. I'm running for Congress because I believe our country's going in the wrong direction. I'm running for Congress because I think low-income and middle-class people being squeezed out of the workforce, being squeezed out of their home, can't find a way to pay the tuition for their children. I believe that government should help you in times of need when you can't help yourself, and we should get out of your way and let you live your life. But we have to give you those opportunities to do so. We have to lower your taxes. We have to stop regulating small businesses who employ so many of our residents and give opportunities to those people who are less fortunate. We have to lift the boat up. Instead of trying to get equality by pulling the successful people down, let's help those who need help get up to standard, get up to a lifestyle that they deserve to live. So I'm asking everybody, you know, Tip O'Neill never got the vote from the woman across the street from him because he never asked her. I'm asking people of the 11th Congressional District to vote for me on May 5th, and the service, the government that I have provided for this community over the last 20 years, I promise I will provide you that same good government in Washington. Thank you very much.
There is a void in the seat of Congress in the 11th Congressional District. We all know that. But you don't fill a void with another void. And that's been Dan's history and through his lack of vision of both here on Staten Island and his desire to go to Congress. Rather, this election should be a message to Congress, and that message is that we won't take a Republican budget that gives New York City a $13.4 billion hit, that we will not play their politics. We will not stand for a budget that cuts revenue to New York City by $13.4 billion in transportation, in healthcare, in housing. It's a bad budget for the middle class. It's a bad budget for New York. What we need is an economy where we raise the minimum wage to $13 an hour, make it a livable wage. What we need is a way to protect seniors from the cuts that the Republicans are proposing on Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, so that they can live in dignity and not be worried about those cuts. We need to have an economy where we can have affordable college for young people, and that's a plan that I have to make college more affordable. We need to get working right away, as I said, to secure Social Security for seniors, to put new money in the Highway Trust Fund so that we can bring money back to Staten Island and Brooklyn and do those infrastructure things that we need to do and create jobs in our congressional district. And most of all, what we need to do is to start building respect for all people.
May 5th, and again, we'd like to thank the College of Staten Island for helping us with tonight's debate. Please stay tuned to New York 1 and read the Staten Island Advance for the latest news on this campaign. Thanks for watching.
Interesting.